Honor is a fragile thing. An insult of character or even a perceived slight throughout history sometimes led to grave consequences. Across many cultures all across the world, a very interesting way of resolving personal conflict was used in order to appease the insulted party. Duels, essentially a one-on-one combat, have been found littered all throughout our history books, having been used by many different cultures. The Vikings, for example, called it holmgang. It was a legally recognized way to settle disputes. Anyone offended could challenge the other party regardless of their differences in social status. This could be over a simple matter of honor, the ownership of property, a legal disagreement, or even to help a wife, relative, or avenge a friend. Another ancient culture known to use the art of dueling was the Japanese samurai. In their culture, respect was king, and any perceived slight would be met with resistance. It was deemed an act of unpardonable rudeness in those days for one samurai to allow the tip of his scarboard to come in contact with the scarboard of another samurai as the men passed each other in the street. In the absence of a prompt apology from the offender, a fight almost always ensued. Even during the early Renaissance, dueling established the status of a respectable gentleman and was an accepted manner to resolve disputes. Dueling was so prevalent in France that from 1685 to 1716, it's estimated high-ranking French officers fought an incredible 10,000 duels. Not to be outdone, the Americans also took dueling very seriously. Between 1798 and the Civil War, the US Navy lost almost as many officers to dueling as it did during combat at sea. By the 19th century, dueling saw a steep decline and many laws were passed throughout the Western world equating a death in such a contest to murder. By the outbreak of World War I, dueling had not only been made illegal almost everywhere in the Western world, but was also widely seen as an outdated method of resolving conflict. Although nowadays the practice has essentially vanished from the face of the earth, we can still be entertained by the incredible tales emerging from history thanks to this most unusual duty. Here are some of the most famous and wildest true stories that have stood the test of time. We'll start things off with the less famous but incredible story of Sir Geoffrey Hudson, who is often compared to the real-life version of Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones. Born in 1619 with dwarfism, Hudson was able to carve out a somewhat respectable life for himself as he famously became an entertainer in the service of Queen Henrietta, the wife of King Charles in England. While living in France, the Queen's dwarf, as he was known, would perform hilarious acts for the French royal court. His most often cited act comes from when he was only 7 years old and stood only 18 inches tall. During a lavish dinner party for the Queen, he surprised her by emerging from the inside of a baked pie. But unfortunately, Hudson would fall out of favor with the royal court a decade later after a duel between himself and William Crafts, the captain of the Queen's Guard. The feud began one evening when Crafts taunted and ridiculed Hudson so severely, the Queen's dwarf challenged the captain to a duel. Accounts from the time say Crafts initially showed up with a squirt gun or water gun, believing the whole situation to be a farce. But quickly he realized this was no laughing matter, as they were both given actual weapons. According to the historical record, they were equipped with pistols and then mounted on horseback. After the signal, contestants galloped towards each other and fired. Crafts fell from the saddle dead with a bullet hole straight through his heart. Dueling was outlawed in France at the time, and the Queen's dwarf was reportedly initially sentenced to death. Thankfully though, the Queen pleaded for his mercy, reducing his sentence only to expulsion back to England. During his return to Britain, he was captured by pirates and spent 25 years as a slave in North Africa. Up next, we have a legendary battle from two Japanese swordsmen. Considered the best Japanese swordsmen of their time, arch rivals Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kajero faced each other in one of Japan's most legendary sword fights. Happening over 400 years ago in 1612, there are several different accounts of the story that led to the actual duel. The one considered the most accurate goes like this. Miyamoto, wishing to put an end to the discussion of who is the best swordsman, requested another respected samurai to arrange a duel between the two fighters. The duel took place on the 13th of April, 1612, on a famous and remote island off the coast of the Bizen province. The event unfolded when Miyamoto arrived hours late to the duel in an apparent move to toy with his opponent's head. On top of this obvious show of disrespect, he came bearing a wooden sword crafted from the oar of a boat. Enraged and feeling his honor had been tarnished, Saseki furiously threw himself into the fight with his signature move, the Swallow Cut. Miyamoto avoided the attack and quickly ended the duel with a strike to Kijero's ribs, which punctured his lungs and proved fatal. With the affair quickly settled, Miyamoto was then chased by his opponent's furious supporters who considered his delayed arrival unfair. Thankfully though, he was able to escape as he hopped back into his boat and rowed to safety. Legend follows that because of this event, Miyamoto retired as a Zen monk and attained spiritual awakening. He then renounced ever doing another lethal duel in the future. Like I previously said earlier, the French took dueling to a whole new level. But perhaps the greatest story emerging from the long list is from General François Fournier and General Pierre Dupont, both officers in Napoleon Bonaparte's army. The pair impressively dueled each other more than 30 times in the span of 19 years. It all started when Dupont was charged with delivering a rather heated message to Fournier. More commonly known as the worst subject in the Grand Army, Fournier was a keen duelist, despite the fact that Napoleon had banned the practice. And on this occasion, Fournier did decide, almost literally, to shoot the messenger. This time, however, winning didn't come so easily. So they fought again, and this time, Dupont received a wound. On their third meeting, both managed to inflict glancing wounds on each other. But the lack of resolution led them to draw up a contract, essentially setting out terms of their private war. It stipulated, number 1, that they should meet sword in hand whenever 100 miles from each other. Number 2, if one was unable to travel through demands from his services, the other would come to him. And number 3, there were to be no excuses whatsoever for not abiding by the contract. Throughout the years, they fought each other on foot and on horseback. They fought with pistols, sabiers, rapiers, swords, and lances. Things finally came to a head in 1813 when Dupont plunged his sword through Fournier's neck during a sword fight in the Swiss wood. Believing this to be a good moment and to try to talk some sense into his rival, Dupont informed Fournier that he was engaged and for the sake of his marriage would rather like to put this dueling business behind him. They agreed on a final pistol showdown in a nearby wood. During the fight, Dupont tricked Fournier, making him fire at a piece of clothing. Fournier finally conceded defeat, thus ending their long rivalry on an unexpectedly peaceful note. Perhaps the most famous duel of all time was the one fought between Alexander Hamilton and Hamilton-Burr. On July 11, 1804, years of escalating personal and political tensions culminated in the most controversial duel in American history. Alexander Hamilton was a leading Federalist and a former Secretary of the Treasury, and Hamilton-Burr was then serving as Vice President under Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton had come to detest Burr, who he regarded as an opportunist, and he furiously campaigned against him during his failed 1804 bid to become governor of New York. Burr resolved to restore his reputation by challenging Hamilton to an affair of honor, as duels were known back then. The enemies met at the dueling grounds near Weehawken, New Jersey, the same spot where one of Hamilton's sons had died defending his father's honor. This loss had inspired Hamilton to denounce dueling, and he lended his voice to the growing movement against the practice. According to some accounts, Hamilton never planned to aim at Burr, hoping instead to fire a symbolic shot into the air and resolve the matter peacefully. Whatever his intentions, Hamilton missed his opponent and was promptly shot in the stomach, and he died the next afternoon. Few affairs of honor actually resulted in deaths at the time, and the nation was outraged by the killing of a man as eminent as Alexander Hamilton. Public opinion turned against Burr, who was charged with murder and then later with treason in an unrelated incident. He was acquitted of the murder charge on a technicality and fled to Europe. Interestingly enough, in a weird twist of irony, 32 years after Hamilton-Burr killed Alexander Hamilton in the duel, his wife served him with divorce papers and left him. Her divorce attorney was Alexander Hamilton, Jr. Alright, now if you've made it this far into the video, you're in for a little bit of a treat. While researching duels, I came across something so amazing I thought to myself that I need to share it with you guys, even though it's not quite in line with this video. Although considered a duel, this one does not involve weapons or would cause bodily harm. In fact, this one is actually a musical duel that was done by a famous pianist called Daniel Steinbelt and Ludwig von Beethoven, widely considered as one of the most talented musicians of all time. Daniel, new to the city of Vienna in Germany and with the aim of advancing his musical reputation, challenged Beethoven to an improvisation contest over the piano. At the time, these improvisation contests were a popular form of entertainment for Vienna's aristocracy. The participants would improvise new melodies on their piano in front of a crowd, and the playing would go back and forth. As the challenger, Steinbelt was to play first. He walked to the piano, tossing a piece of his own music off to the side, and played. Steinbelt was renowned for conjuring up a storm on the piano, and this is what he did to great effect. He rose to great applause, and all eyes turned to Beethoven. When he got to the piano, he picked up the piece of music that Steinbelt had put off to the side. He looked at it, showed it to the audience, and then amazingly turned it upside down. He sat on the piano and played the 4 notes in the opening bar of Steinbelt's music, imitating Steinbelt's storm. He parried it and mocked it, all with the notes being upside down. Steinbelt, realizing that he was not only being comprehensively outplayed but humiliated, stormed out of the room. He was so taken aback by the affair that he said he would never again set foot in Vienna as long as Beethoven lived there. Of course, Beethoven went on to live in Vienna for the rest of his life, and Steinbelt kept his promise. He never again returned. And on that note, we will end today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video.